Serious, what dark family secret were you let in on once you were old enough? I found out I had a sister who had been given up for adoption. The only reason I found out was the person who informed me no longer felt bound to secrecy after my mom died. And the person who told me had receipts solid enough that I have no reason to doubt them. It also explains why Mom freaked out when I told her I'd done a 23andMe test. My uncle was actually my cousin. He was kidnapped as an infant, and when he was returned a year later, my aunt didn't want him back. My grandparents adopted him, so he was legally my uncle. My uncle molested my mom. I don't understand how he is still welcome in the family. I found out when I was in my early 30s that my mom hadn't only had 4 kids, but actually 6, but gave 2 up for adoption before I was born. Also, I was the last baby she had with some rando before she married my stepdad, and she had intended to give me up for adoption, as well. Silver lining? One of the babies she gave up contacted her a few years after I learned about this, and now I have an awesome new brother. My dad's first cousin is serial killer Kenneth McDuff. We saw the America's Most Wanted episode when it aired and were so surprised to hear about a McDuff, not knowing he was a relative. That my grandma didn't lose her leg to cancer, she lost it because she got injured helping my grandpa fix the roof, and my grandpa was too cheap to have it fixed properly, so he told the doctor to cut it off. Then he beat the crap out of her for life. My paternal grandmother had an affair with our small town's mortician in the 1940s. She got pregnant and he performed an illegal abortion. The fetus was buried behind the funeral home he owned where we kids used to sled every winter. My dad told me this as I was getting ready to take a ride down the hill on the sled when I was 12. Also, paternal grandfather had multiple illegitimate children around our small town. Turns out one of my best friends was also my half-cousin. Father told me when I was 17. My father was educated, intelligent, honest and moral. The fact that his parents were so wild was absolutely shocking to me. My uncle didn't die in a car accident. He killed his mistress and then killed himself by crashing his car with her body in the trunk. That my biological mother used to give me heroin and Valium as a baby and toddler to control me, then drop me off at my grandmother's house when she couldn't afford to share, so I'd go through withdrawals, but no one would know what was wrong. Needless to say, I was put up for adoption to get me away from that. I knew my grandfather was a coal miner, and that he was really involved with the union, but it wasn't till after he died that I found out just how much of a union man he was. If something needed blowing up or someone needed to not be breathing anymore, they called Gramps. After he died, my brother remembers some men coming to visit Gran and giving her a lot of envelopes. She took off for a year-long vacation in Europe after that. My grandpa can't have kids, but my mother still has 3 siblings. My great-aunt's husband killed his first wife, then killed her. They lived in Puerto Rico, and he fled to NYC so my great-uncles wouldn't kill him. They found out where he was, came here, killed him, and went home. Edit, typo. My grandpa, 15, kidnapped my grandma, 14, from a convent. No one even bothered looking for her thereafter, 'cause she was an orphan and didn't even know who her family was. They had 16 children together. I don't know about dark, but here goes. My great-grandfather murdered the mayor of the village he lived in. Why? Because the mayor was sleeping with his mom while his father worked on the field. I think he was 15 or 16 when he did that. Great-grandma died from a botched abortion when she got pregnant a 7th time. My dad left when I was 7, and we were always told that it just didn't work out with my parents. We saw him off and on for about 2 years after he left, then never saw him again. He had remarried and she had a kid that became his stepson that my brother and I would hang with when we would go to my dad's house, Then when I turned 13, my mom finally told me that the stepson was actually his son from having an affair with that woman. So that kid was my half-brother, and I had no clue. My dad secretly had a vasectomy after I was born, after my mom lying to him about taking birth control resulted in my birth. Our family is great at communication and conflict resolution. Not super dark or super secret, but when I had to do a project on my family tree in elementary school, one of the questions was, when did your family immigrate to America, and why? For one of my great-grandfathers, my grandma told me life was very hard back in his country, and it was getting dangerous to stay there. And for a long time I thought, yeah, I can see that. It was probably hard for a teenager living in Poland with World War I right around the corner. And I'm sure it was. But it turns out it's even harder and more dangerous when you're a teenager who has slept with a married woman and then accidentally killed her husband when he confronted you. I can see why she didn't want me to put that on my elementary school project. Edit, wrong World War. I just pulled up his Ellis Island records, and he immigrated in 1912 aboard the Carpathia in August. When my grandma's gentleman friend was admitted into a care home for his dementia, they had a problem in verifying his medical records. As he deteriorated, he lost his Irish accent and would occasionally speak in German. He was a child during WW2. My parents reckon he was probably a Jewish escapee. Found out one of my close relatives was a trigger man for a crime family, was killed at his daughter's school functions. I wasn't let in on it, more like I found out about it, but my siblings have a different dad than I do. That was common knowledge and not the secret at all. The secret was that their dad actually didn't die in the hospital of a terminal illness, he died of suicide when he threw himself from the window of the hospital he was slowly dying in. Found out my dad's mom was a lesbian and that my godmother who lived with both my grandfather and grandmother was actually her lover. They slept in the same bed while my grandfather had his own room. Growing up I had no idea, but as I got older I pieced it together. But I loved them all and still do, R.I.P. My grandpa's stepdad's side, first wife, tried to murder him, and went to prison for it. Then also, my aunt, mom's side, was pimped out by her husband for decades. I was told by my aunt, before my parents thought it necessary, that my dad had cheated on my mom and slept with a stripper and that I was her daughter and not actually my mother's. I found out years later that my dad wasn't actually my dad either, though he thought he was, which is why he put his name on my birth certificate and brought me home when my birth mother wanted nothing to do with me. Fun times. My wife was molested by her brother, and basically everyone except her dad knew it was going on and did nothing. I wouldn't say this is something I found out when I was old enough, but found out after my wife and I had been together a while when we were dating. An older relative murdered her husband in cold blood. The daughter lied on the witness stand by testifying that her dad beat her mom. He didn't. The mom was a drunk, and the father was threatening to leave her and take the kids. B/C, the courts believed the lying daughter, the murdering mother kept custody of the kids. The victim's family cut off my whole side of the family after that, including their perjuring granddaughter and her descendants. Now I know why. My dad took me out for a walk when I was in middle school to tell me that I have a half-brother in Japan with a similar name and birthday as me. We have the same dad, different moms. My brother has known about me his whole life, as a sister who lives in the States, but I only found out about his existence on that day. When my father's dad died, the secret was out. Grandpa was an evil man who bootlegged liquor, stole cattle and kidnapped Indian children to sell into slavery. He had a very public mistress, and coming home from a bender, he knocked up his wife, my grandma. In order to save face to his mistress, he took the knitting needles to grandma, thus infecting her to die of sepsis in territorial New Mexico in 1929. My dad was 6 with younger brother 4, left to grow up as virtual orphans. Despised by the aunts, and forbidden help from their uncles, my dad and his brother grew up in the Depression, almost starving, while their dad lived it up, traveling and committing many crimes that were easy to get away with, because it was the Great Depression. My great-uncle was a Nazi, my grandmother and their whole family hated the Jews, prior to WW2. Edited.